Hey, this is Bailey, Director of Innovation at Intelligentsia Coffee. I'm going to go over how to pull 5 different profiles on your Flair 58. So maybe you just got a Flair and you're wondering exactly how to use it, or you're thinking about getting one and are unsure what you're going to do with it. I want to show you a few profiles that'll help you get confident and making coffee that you're going to enjoy. We're going to start with something accessible like a flat 9-bar shot that is going to resemble something like you could get from your local coffee bar. And then we'll make something that declines in pressure, and then a few modern styles as well. And so let's get started in setup and puck prep. Here I've got the Flair 58 Plus, and I'm going to be pairing that with an Acaia Lunar Scale. I do have the shot mirror that comes with it. This is key. Love this. Love the new design. I also will be using just the standard basket, the high flow basket that comes with the Flair 18-gram basket. I've got an SEP, a Smart Espresso profile on here. You obviously do not need this. I have this here so that I can make some graphs and show you what these profiles look like as they're pulling. With the pressure gauge, I do normally just use the regular Flair pressure gauge, and this is great. So if you have that, I would use it. For the heating, I just always use 3 lights. Our coffees are on the lighter side, and I think this consistency of the high heat is really nice. And then mostly we'll control brewing temperature through the kettle. So this is Stag EKG, and I'm brewing all of these coffees at 95C or roughly 203. I'll be on some of the shots using just going straight into the basket. Some of them, the more modern ones that are fast, will use a bottom paper. I cut these just out of a Chemex paper. And then Swarks, funnel, WDT, any kind of tamp, and these are all made with the Flair puck screen that comes with it. I typically like to use a puck disc, like from Swarks Design, that is a single layer and a little easier to keep clean. For the sake of simplicity, I wanted to use the things that come with the Flair, like the basket and the screen, and it works super well. The puck prep on all of these is pretty standard, so just went through the grinder. I used an Acaia Orbit for all of these with SSP MP burrs in there, even for the flat 9-bar trad shot that we'll start with. And I also took notes on the burr gap for all of those, so that's going to be dependent on the grinder and the burrs, but I'll put that in the video as well so you can get a general idea of at least how the grind compares relative to each other for these different shots, whereas at least the gap itself is probably going to be different for your particular grinder and burr. So through that grinder, then WDT, tamp, puck screen, pretty simple, straightforward. So the next thing I want to go over is the fill, actually. So there's lots of different ways to do the fill, and it kind of matters. And I think it's important for you to develop a consistent fill routine so that you can lock that in as a constant variable for you and just worry about what you're doing with the coffee. So what matters here is the amount of water you're getting in. So I like to pull a lot of bigger ratio shots, 1 to 2.5, 1 to 3, and it's helpful if you're not running out of water as the shot is finishing. So you can get a 1 to 3 shot, 18 to 54, for example, or 20 to 60, and actually start to run out of water towards the end. You'll still get your 60 yield or your 54 yield, but you'll lose control of pressure and it will start to naturally decline on its own. It's just the remaining pressure in the basket that is kind of pushing the water through. It's not really you pushing it through anymore, and it will have this kind of curved decline in it. So I try to get as much water in there as I can, and I also try to get all of the air out. Those are sort of the same thing, but not always, and for different reasons. I think it's helpful to burp the reservoir, get air out of here, because the water is essentially incompressible, but the air is definitely compressible. And while that doesn't necessarily affect your coffee all that much, it affects the way it feels. When you have air in the group and you pull on the lever, you feel that air compress, and it's a more bouncy feeling. And it's another inconsistency in your workflow that can, if you have air in this shot, but then not tomorrow morning or this afternoon, then it just starts to feel different, and it's harder for you to do what you want to do to the coffee intentionally time and time again. So I start with the plunger down, and I do this because I usually use a puck disc, and it's helpful for that one-way valve to actually absorb the impact of the water coming through. With the puck screen, it blocks a lot of the water, and so if you were to start with the one-way valve up and the water's falling farther, it doesn't really matter as much. I start with it down, and then I kind of wiggle the handle here. The valve has a tendency to close itself, and so you're just kind of popping it open and making sure that it stays that way. This is especially a bigger concern with the Smart Espresso Profiler because it's so heavy, it actually pulls it down, and less of an issue with the regular gauge. So I will keep this kind of popped open, and I will let water go straight into the headspace onto the coffee basically immediately. Some people don't like this because you're extending the contact time with the water in the coffee, and this tends to push your grind a little finer. It begins the saturation a little earlier. Again, I'm not really worried about that. I'm more worried about having consistency in something that's going to be the same every time. So that doesn't bother me. If you do want to keep this closed, fill the reservoir, then what you need to do essentially is when you get the reservoir full, you would then burp it, let the air out of the headspace between the valve and the top of the puck. Those bubbles come out, and then if you want more water in there, then you can top it up again. One thing I also like about the Plus, I don't think the other ones have this if I recall correctly, is that it has this collar that sticks up a little bit higher above the metal part of the reservoir. This means I can essentially overfill the reservoir, and if there is any extra air that I didn't get out early on and it sneaks out later when I lift the plunger, then there's a little bit of extra air that fills that, or extra water that fills in that where that air was. I can also make sure I lift the lever all the way to the top so I get full range and as much of the water under the plunger as possible, and I don't have to worry about accidentally reintroducing air. So practice your fill routine. You don't even need coffee to do this. I have coffee in here right now that's been sitting here this whole time while I'm talking, and I'm just gonna do a quick fill and show you what it looks like. Super simple. So basically, like I said, I'll have my kettle, open this valve a little bit and start to pour straight in. Bounce it sometimes, it sometimes helps the burping, and then water's a little bit over the metal part. I hold the Flair down on the logo, pull this up, and then this is just for me with the Smart Espresso Profiler. I usually have to kind of push it to the side because it's so heavy. That's not really a concern with a typical pressure gauge. And that's the fill. And then all of our shots are going to start from here, and we'll show you what they look like after this. One thing I do also want to make sure to cover is what you do afterwards. So when your shot's done, pull your lever up, grab a catch cup, swap these out, and then push the rest of your water through, because you've just re-pushed the one-way valve back up. Go ahead and get rid of the rest of that water. You can hear and see all this air and bubbles coming out. That's actually really nice because you end up with dry pucks, no soupiness, it's not messy, it's really great. And you can even do this a couple times if you're extra concerned about it. Sometimes you'll feel a little pressure in there. This is a really coarse coffee in this instance, so I'm not really getting a lot of pushback, and that's basically it. I'll open this to fully release the pressure. And this just goes, down the drain, and then clean this up like usual. Our first shot, the flat 9-bar shot, might sound really simple. You're just gonna take it to 9 bars, hold it there until it's done. The more nuanced part of this is how you do the initial compression, the pressure application. So if we think about a typical machine with a pump that we would see in our local coffee bar, you start the shot, pump turns on, and starts sending water to the group. That headspace above the puck starts to fill, it fills it up, and then it starts to build pressure, and that pressure then helps to start pushing that water through the coffee and out the other side of the basket. And the Flair is a totally different setup. We're filling that headspace, the whole reservoir. We've got all this water sitting on top of the coffee from the beginning, and there's no pressure built. So when we start to apply pressure, we have to decide how we're gonna do it. We can pull fairly slowly, and we will actually just start to gradually move water through. The puck doesn't really compress, it'll swell, and we're actually able to move water through quite easily, and the shot will be over before we know it. If we slam the puck, then we'll actually compress the heck out of it, and it will have a really hard time moving water through. It'll clog, you'll be pulling the shot for over a minute, and and both of these shots I just described as accidents are their own profiles and have their own fans, but that's not what we're discussing here. So we need to decide how we're going to do it. So basically, it's just a confident pull, and I don't really know how else to say it than that. You're not slamming it, it's not gradual, you got to have some confidence, and you ramp to 9, you'll see your needle move up, and you go there. When it comes to actually ending the shot, you'll watch your scale readout. I would recommend pulling these shots around 1 to 2, 1 to 2.5. I pull 1 to 2.5, and so I'll be going 18 to 45. I'll be looking at the scale readout and cut it a little early. So if I'm aiming for 45, when I see 43, I'll lift the lever up to stop the shot. It'll get a couple more grams out, and I'm good to go. So that's the 9-bar shot. Now let's see what that looks like. So the next shot I want to go over is a shot with a declining pressure profile, something more like a typical spring lever shot. So here I would suggest targeting a peak pressure somewhere between 5 and 9 bars. I know that's a huge range, but honestly I think that it's a very forgiving shot, and this is why I would recommend something like this being what most people are probably looking for. So 5 to 9, and then decline the pressure over the duration of the shot, probably to something like 2 bars, 1, 2, 3, something in that range. You can still pull this at like a typical traditional shot duration in the mid to high 20 seconds, and I would pull it again anywhere from 1 to 2.5 to 1 to 3, so 18 to 45 to 54 is going to be great. And I would say that the nice thing about a shot like this is that when that pressure is declining and your flow is more flat, I don't actually think it's perfectly flat, you're still probably accelerating a little bit, you are going to be preparing a shot that it's more forgiving. So you'll be able to swap from coffee to coffee to coffee, or from just over the duration of the bag, from day to day, and your grind will not be as finicky for you. You'll be able to modulate the pressure and the flow a little bit more reliably to get you something that tastes good. You'll be able to avoid things like astringency, dryness, harsh flavors more reliably with a shot that peaks at a lower pressure. I'll be aiming for 6, 7 bars, and then declines over the duration of the shot to about 2 bars. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so this third shot, we're gonna just call this pull hard, pull soft. This is like a working name. If you have a better name for this, let us know in the comments. But this shot is the first one that we actually started serving. So you may know that we have a Flair in our Pasadena coffee bar where we prepare modern style shots for people. We'll go over that profile in a minute. But the one that we started with is this one. And the name kind of explains it. Pull hard, pull soft. Also, some people call it like a linear ramp with a declining pressure or flat flow. So here we would peak at 5 bars, so fill, and then just immediately ramp to 5. And then from there, we're going to basically let off on the pressure almost entirely. We drop down to 2 or 3 bars, and then yeet the rest of the water through. So this is a fast shot. For our coffees, we're typically targeting 14 to 18 seconds for these, and they end up being a little bit more focused on the acidity. They're more nuanced. There's still plenty of sweetness and balance here. And I think that these coffees also taste better with some lower resistance baskets. So either some of the more modern low resistance baskets, or this is where I started to use the bottom paper is in a shot like this. So if you're at home and you don't want to spend a ton of money on a basket, you could totally go with a Flair sock basket and put a bottom paper in there on the bottom. That'll create a low resistance environment for the coffee, and it also helps to keep it clean. So when you're pulling shots that fast without a bottom paper, you can get pretty bad spray, and maybe that doesn't bother you. I think for a lot of people it does, and it's gonna help keep your kitchen cleaner. So I would pull these at 1 to 3, and let's take a look at what those look like. Alrighty, now the shot that we are currently serving in Pasadena is the pull soft, pull hard. So this is much more accessible shot style, I think. I have a friend who actually says that it's the most intuitive shot profile. If you had never used a machine like this before and you just walked up to it, this is probably what you would do to it. And so here you're going to again, this is a modern style shot, so it's fairly fast. You'll start with your fill, and then you'll start to apply pressure. And this is where it starts to get nuanced. This is where the shot mirror becomes key. So in this scenario with the pull soft, pull hard, people are applying pressure anywhere from 0 to 3 bars. And so it's a gentle pull, and then you're watching the shot mirror for the screen to fill and for you to saturate the puck. So it's not first drops, it's not weight on the scale, because you can get that before the screen fills. In Pasadena, where we're serving these, to add a little bit more consistency, we do go by weight in cup, but we don't do initial drops. So it's like 3 grams in cup, And pretty much across the board in my experience, when you've got 3 grams in the cup, you do have the whole screen filled. If you were to go by 1 gram in the cup, you actually can have still like a portion of the puck not fully saturated. So 3 or even 5 grams in cup, you're gonna be fully filled. 0 to 3 bars on that initial pre-infusion, saturation, soak. There's a lot of different things that people call this step. And then at that point, you would ramp up. Pick your peak pressure, anywhere from 3 to 6 bars, 3 to 7 even. If you get to 4 and above, you will make crema and you'll add a little bit more body to this. So it is certainly possible to pull these modern style shots and have viscosity on them. So these I would also pull 1 to 3, and again, using a bottom paper to help keep it clean and low resistance, or a modern style basket. I should also say at the Pull Soft Pull Hard, the flavor profile is very similar to that of the Pull Hard Pull Soft, where there is an emphasis on the acidity, but this is an even higher extraction yield profile. So I do find that the sweetness is even more boosted here. They can be even more round. So it's a good balance in between something like a more typical spring lever profile and something like the one that starts fast then goes slow. If you're curious about trying some modern style shots, I think Pull Soft Pull Hard is a great way to start. It's a great entryway. And so that's Pull Soft Pull Hard. Let's take a look at what it is like. Now this next shot I'm gonna go over is kind of a bonus. So this one, we're gonna call this DC Soup after DC, the person who popularized this shot style. And this is a variation on Pull Soft Pull Hard. So the difference here is that the definition's a little bit more narrow. So you're going to do that initial saturation at essentially no pressure. So with the Flair, you wouldn't wanna see the needle moving up at all. You would maximum want to hit like half a bar of pressure, which, you know, on a dial is hard to see what that actually looks like, and get full screen fill, again, maybe a few grams in the cup, and then yeet the rest of the water through. This is a very coarse grind for coffee like this. We're talking around 300 microns. And once you apply pressure, shot times can be sub 10 seconds. So 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 seconds is very common once you actually apply pressure. The initial soak, usually you want that flow to be very low and gentle. And the longer it is, the higher the extraction yield will be. The faster it is, the lower it will be. This is, again, a very acidity focused shot profile with still plenty of sweetness. And again, it kind of depends on how you control the initial saturation, the duration of it, and the grind. Those things are kind of intertwined. It's a very fun shot. It's kind of crazy. It looks crazy. It feels crazy to pull it. It's like over as soon as it begins, but it's very fun, totally worth trying. Let's take a look at that. All right, and this last shot I want to go over, we're going to just call it F2.x. This is basically inspired by Filter 2.0, 2.1, but when you started to pull those profiles off of the decent and put them into the manual world, they kind of need to be called something else. They don't have the functionality that the decent has. It's fully manual. So here what you're doing is you're making a small concentrate that you can then dilute to essentially be a filter coffee. They can be very sweet, very nuanced. I do think that they tend to be a little bit more lacking clarity than a lot of pour overs can be, especially fast ones. but it can be very fun and a very quick and easy way to make a small amount of coffee. Typically, we would use a 15 to 16 gram dose that's going to yield an 8-ounce beverage. You'll pull that 1 to 3, 1 to 3.5, and typically you'll do an initial saturation. So you'll go 15, 16 grams in. Also, super important that you do use a bottom paper for this. This is again about a low resistance basket that's going to provide more even flow. So 15, 16 grams in. Then the tamp, originally Rao prescribed basically not tamping, just make it flat. We're going to put the weight of the tamp on, maybe a couple pounds. Plenty of people do tamp. It's okay either way. I typically don't really. I typically just put it on, very little pressure. And then again, for all these shots, I used a puck screen, but it's also very common that people will just use a paper on the top. All right, then you're doing an initial saturation of the puck at essentially zero pressure. So you will watch the screen, make sure that fills, and depending on how you've controlled your grind, which typically I will use a pretty fine grind closer to a traditional shot spec, and depending on how you've controlled that will determine then how water continues to flow through that. The handle of the Flair does have some weight to it, and if you simply let go of it, if your grind is coarse enough, the weight of the handle will continue to push water through. If your grind is too coarse, you may actually need to apply a half bar of pressure if your grind is too fine, you may actually need to apply, like let's say a half bar of pressure to get water to go through, and then you can let go and it's just gonna sit there. That's fine. We just want water on the puck and it's gonna continue to drip through. Typically you're gonna see about 10 grams in the cup around 45 seconds, a minute in. So do your saturation and then let off. You're gonna let that sit and essentially bloom for 45 to 90 seconds. Again, the longer you let this bloom and sit and steep like this, soak, the more you're gonna kind of pull flavors together, also the more extraction yield you're gonna get. So you might end up with a little bit lower extraction yield if you do it quicker, 45 seconds, but you'll also get a little bit more clarity, nuance, definition around your flavors. Then once you get to that, let's call it a minute mark, then you'll start to apply pressure. This, I would say, if you have a scale that will measure flow, that's where that can be handy. I think somewhere around 1 to 2 milliliters a second flow is nice. I think when it comes to pressure, just don't try to build much pressure. Let it sit around under 1 bar or at 1 bar, I think is good if you can just kind of pull that through. If you go really fast, you will start to introduce astringency into the cup, which we don't want. So it's better to air more slowly and let that flow through, get to 1 to 3, 1 to 3.5, and stop your shot. You'll end up with a little concentrate, which then you can dilute back up to 236 grams for an 8-ounce cup of filter coffee, and enjoy. So this is what that looks like. But that was kind of a lot, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Let us know what you think. Like the video, hit us with the subscribe. Let us know if you main any of these profiles right now, or if you're curious to try any of these others. And anything else you guys have to share with us. We really appreciate your time and hope you have a great day. Thanks.